Welcome back to the Tech Talks Daily podcast, where today we're joined by Michael Tyler, a cybersecurity expert from a company called Fortra. And in our conversation today, we're going to explore the critical topic that's increasingly relevant in the cybersecurity world. What I'm talking about are the tactics cyber criminals are using to exploit trusted platforms, trusted services for malicious purposes. Because recently, Fortra uncovered a sophisticated phishing campaign that abused the legitimate e-signature platform uSign. And in doing so, they were able to bypass traditional email security gateways and filtering tools. So I want to explore how attackers are leveraging these trusted services to conduct their operations, while also avoiding detection and the challenges that it poses for defenders. And Michael will also share insights into the broader implication of this living off trusted services tactic and how organisations can fortify their defences against these evolving threats. And hopefully enable you to answer, how can your organisation stay ahead in this ever-changing cybersecurity landscape? Reaching listeners in 165 countries every day is testament to the unwavering support of you, my listeners, and our sponsors, without whom this podcast just simply wouldn't be possible. And it also gives me a chance to talk about the fact that legacy DRM failed to securely enable external collaboration, especially on sensitive files, and how every organisation faces this risk-trust contradiction where they can share content with untrusted third parties, yet expected to protect that data. So it's time for something more modern, a DRM solution that solves that dilemma without compromising security or productivity. And you can do all that with a company called Kiteworks that will enable you to say goodbye to deployment headaches, file transfer risk, collaboration barriers, and productivity constraints, so you can experience a more modern way to collaborate on sensitive content without sacrificing control or security. Please visit kiteworks.com to get started today. That's kiteworks.com to get started today. Now is the moment you've really been waiting for. It's time to get today's guest on. So a massive warm welcome to the show. Can you tell everyone listening a little about who you are and what you do?
Yeah, thanks, Neil. So my name is Michael Tyler. I've been in the cybersecurity field in one way or another for about 15 years or so. And over that time, I've done a lot, right? Spent some time in malware analysis, phishing, threat intel, and email security. Currently, I'm the Senior Director of Security Operations here at Fortra, or one of a couple of our senior directors. I oversee all of our managed service operations for our email security and our digital risk business functions, which are things like phishing, impersonations, and other fraud. I also run our managed threat intelligence operations here, where we help our customers understand, the bigger picture about how they're being targeted by adversaries with regards to these different types of fraud and email scams.
And I'm glad you mentioned the word phishing there, because that's one of the things that put you on my radar there, the phishing campaign that abused uSign. And I think it was Fortra that recently discovered it. That's what put you on my radar. So can you just expand on that for anybody that's not heard of it? And also, what are the key tactics being used by the cyber criminals in these attacks?
For those that aren't familiar with uSign is an e-signature service. Where basically instead of having to fax a contract over and then, ship it back and forth, you can execute contracts or other types of documents digitally. Well, in this instance, an adversary has figured out that they were able to take uSign's platform and basically create a phishing website out of it, where instead of asking you for your signature, it asks you for your password. And they've basically used this, they basically created this, fake document and then have sent it out as a phishing email to victims. So there's a couple of pretty interesting tactics here. The first is the use of uSign. So this is a tactic that we call living off trusted services, or LOTS, LOTS, if you hear me say that.
Yeah.
That basically means instead of an attacker setting up their own infrastructure and, registering their own domain, setting up their own site, they take advantage of a service that's out there, a legitimate service that a lot of, normal law-abiding folks use, and they figure out a way to twist it to meet their own ends. And I think that's, probably, the use sign and that abuse is the main focus. A couple of other interesting tactics. The email campaign that we're talking about here specifically shows signs that it was built using generative AI, which I know is a big topic right now. And so we are seeing and see here, instances where adversaries, instead of taking the time to write the email, write the lures themselves, will use Gen AI, and generate these very quickly with a simple prompt.
And the question I've got to ask on behalf of business leaders listening everywhere that use e-signature services, because let's be honest, most do now, and they will also believe that they have robust cybersecurity measures in place. So the question I've got to ask is how are cyber criminals leveraging these legitimate e-signature services like USign, and how are they bypassing email security gateways and filtering tools?
Yeah, absolutely. So, we'll focus on e-signatures, but I think it's important to call out that living off trusted services isn't limited to e-signature services. File hosting, social media platforms, pretty much any service where users can come in and generate their own content is at risk for a living off trusted services abuse. And I call that out just because protecting your organization against this can't just stop at e-signature services. But the concepts are all basically the same. So it comes down to trust. When a legitimate service like USign or another e-signature service generates lots of good traffic and relatively small amounts of bad traffic, the way that we do sort of domain reputation folds in their favor, right? They go, well, 99% of the time, the email coming from this domain is going to be legitimate, so I'm going to let it through. This is necessary in the way that things currently exist, because if you had a zero tolerance policy, then one bad actor getting in doing something bad shuts down your entire business, right? Which, everybody says, well, that's fine until it happens to them.
Yeah.
So ultimately, if, I'm going to make up some math here, right? Yeah. If USign if they send out 1 million and 100 are malicious, well, that's 1 in 10,000.
Yeah.
That's malicious. And that's a very small percentage. And a lot of organizations are going to say, okay, well, that's not too bad, right? That's an acceptable risk for me to be able to accept this mail. So this is why they sail past most email gateways. And this is, it's the same reason why, you will see a lot of organizations get attacked by threats coming from Gmail addresses, because Gmail sends a ton of mail. They have a very strong reputation because by and large, the vast majority of email that they send is legitimate. And as a result, they have a strong domain reputation. And by default, they will pass through most email filters.
It's such a great example, because before you came on the podcast, I was also reading about the fact that domains associated with legitimate service providers like Gmail, as you mentioned there, or USign, they're often not blocked by these email filters. So as a result, what kind of challenges is this posing for cybersecurity teams?
Well, it poses it poses a bunch of challenges, because living off trusted services provides adversaries with a lot of benefits. The first is, if the platform they're abusing is free, as most of them are, well, they don't have to pay for infrastructure anymore. So, there's a little bit of a financial burden, but oftentimes, even if it's a low cost service, they still can come out ahead financially, apart from doing it themselves. They also don't have to take the time and energy to stand up their own infrastructure, which helps there. But from a defense perspective, I'd say there's three big issues with living off trusted services. The first, and we'll see this, if we look directly at this campaign in detail in a minute, it reduces the indicators that are available to us, because you no longer can say, well, I'm going to look for email coming from this sender because the sender is the trusted service. You can no longer look and say, well, I'm going to look for this malicious URL because the URL points at the trusted service. A lot of the traditional methods for blocking threats don't work very well when you apply them to a living off trusted services attack. We also have the reputation issue, which means that most of your automated email filtering is not going to block based on the sending domain, and that you're going to have to rely on other mechanisms, which might be more expensive, or they may be more time intensive, which can cause issues for email delivery, right? You can't, most organizations aren't going to tolerate holding an email for 5 minutes while you run every scan under the sun on it.
And I'm curious, what are the specific threat indicators that Fortra was able to identify in these phishing campaigns? Are there any examples that you can share just to illustrate and shine a light on these indicators? Because, hey, it may help somebody listening.
Yeah, absolutely. So, well, you saw the blog, right? So yeah. I don't know if sharing the link to the blog is something that you can do as part of the podcast. That will get them all of the details and the screenshots. But as far as the specific indicators, so there's two really hard indicators here. The first is the sender's name, or sometimes we call this a friendly from, in more technical terms, where even though the actual sending address comes from a usign.com sending address, it will have we call it a friendly from, where it will have a more narrative name, right? So for example, your actual email address might be techblogwriter@outlook.com, but when you send an email, it might say Neil Hughes next to it as a friendly from. So for this email campaign, we saw the friendly from of usign for HR notification. We also have an email subject, which was, you've been invited to sign, review, updated 2024 employee handbook. It's not a very eloquent subject, but that's the one that they chose to use.
Yeah.
So these will help you identify this exact campaign. The problem is that these are also very easy to change. And so I couldn't recommend them for more of a general use case.
And given that attackers can conceal their phishing attempts under these service providers' domain name and even generate unique links for each request, and as you said that, it's very challenging because they can all be changed every day, even every email. So what strategies can organizations employ to detect and mitigate some of these threats that we're talking about here?
So as we mentioned, it's challenging. Actually, Neil, I realized on the earlier question, we were talking about living off trusted services. I told you that there were 3 challenges, and I only gave you 2 of them. I'll give you the third one real quick. The third challenge with living off trusted services is actually that as a recipient of the email, it can be more difficult for an end user to recognize that an email is malicious, because especially if they use that service, in this case, usign, regularly, they may see usign, they may go, oh, this is usign, I know them, I trust them, when in fact, it could be an attacker that's taking advantage of that service.
Yeah, makes perfect sense. And so how can companies better bolster their defense against phishing attacks that exploit e-signature services? Are there any recommendations that you have at Fortra here for improving security measures and ensuring that things like this don't happen in the future?
We'll start by acknowledging that this is a challenge.
Yeah.
Living off trusted services, dealing with, the strong reputation that these services possess is challenging for organizations to handle. And the best solution really requires a partnership between cybersecurity services and these, trusted platforms. But on the cybersecurity side, the two recommendations I would make to any organization is, first, strong end user education. Knowing how difficult these things are to stop proactively to prevent them from getting into your environment means that you need to invest in multiple layers of defense. And end user education is one of those layers. Train your employees on how to recognize when something doesn't smell right. Social engineering is, the crux of phishing, tricking somebody into giving up, critical information that they wouldn't otherwise provide. And teaching your employees how to recognize when they're being manipulated is critical. Because that's actually the downfall of social engineering, is that the spell only works until you notice that something's wrong. And then it generally falls apart. For example, we look at this uSign email, and the minute that you go, HR's never sent a uSign document to me to be signed before, all of a sudden you realize that something's hugely wrong. You also could go, why on earth would HR need my password?
Yeah.
So that's part of it. The other part is having a strong, rapid response, program in place to deal with a threat that makes it past your security protocols. Because what you really want to be able to take advantage of is if the email gets delivered to if the email gets delivered to 10 people and one person recognizes it as a threat and is able to report it to the security team immediately, the first order of business needs to be getting it blocked or pulled out of the email inboxes of those other 9 people, or taking steps to contain the issue. Now, those are the two approaches I would recommend to any organization. There's more dramatic steps that some organizations could take, such as, looking to identify services, trusted services that they don't use and working to proactively block them. That can be risky though, because, for example, let's use uSign again. Even if you don't use uSign and you want to sign a contract with a third-party vendor that uses uSign and you've blocked uSign, well, that's going to be very difficult to do. And so organizations are going to have to balance how aggressively they work to contain these attacks with making sure that they don't overly disrupt business operations.
And we've talked a lot today around what businesses can do to better protect themselves. But, I mean, in your opinion, how should some of these trusted service providers, like e-signature service providers, what should they be doing to enhance their security protocols to prevent their own platforms from being exploited in this way for phishing campaigns? Anything that they could be doing better, do you think?
Yeah, absolutely. So right now, living off trusted services is really a popular attack vector. uSign is one of many platforms that we see abused. And the reason it's so popular is because these providers have been primarily focused on things like ease of access, user base size, and other metrics that demonstrate success as a business. And there's nothing inherently wrong with that. And I'm not saying that these providers encourage abusive use of their services, because I don't think that's true. But preventing malicious use does take a back seat oftentimes. There's several things that providers can do to limit the opportunity for adversaries to take advantage, as well as sort of raise the barrier to entry so that they have to try harder. These are things like limiting bulk registration opportunities. We see some platforms where you can sign up for an account via an API or something like that. And it's fairly trivial to write a little script that will just automate signing up for 100 or 1,000 accounts, which gives them a very large footprint on the service and it generates a lot of work for that platform to then go clean up the mess. So limiting bulk registration opportunities. I would also say working to improve sort of know your customer routines, even on free trials. A lot of these services will offer free trials or be available, at a base tier for free. And attackers will take advantage of that. They'll take advantage of it repeatedly. One free trial ends and they'll just go sign up for another account. Working to improve their ability to detect sort of duplicate registrations and, other know your customer opportunities will help minimize that. These platforms also can implement sort of proactive scanning of either high risk, such as, like, let's use USign, for example, right? If somebody creates a form that says, please enter your password, I cannot think of any legitimate reason why a user of one of these platforms would put something like that in one of their forms. And so, USign has the ability to see what is being put on their platform and taking steps to minimize that. These really high risk opportunities can help. It's not going to be perfect, right? You can't block every possible version of trying to get somebody to type in their password, but you can make it harder. You also can look for anomalous usage of services. If somebody signs up an account and within 15 minutes, they're blasting out thousands of emails, it's a pretty big red flag. And then finally, something that we also said on the recipient side of this equation, rapid response and takedown of identified threats. Adversaries will continue to abuse a trusted service or another platform until it no longer meets their needs, usually because it's not worth the trouble to use it. How long they're allowed to sit on the platform before action's taken against them is a huge determining factor.
So as we look ahead into the future, we're only a few months away from 2025 already. So what steps do you think cybersecurity industry needs to take to address some of these evolving tactics that we're talking about here that cyber criminals are using, particularly in the context of exploiting legitimate business services for malicious purposes? Anything else that the entire industry should be doing better, do you think?
Cybersecurity is a cat and mouse game.
Yeah.
Living off trusted services showed up because we got really good at blocking low reputation domains. I'm not going to say it never happens, but it is a lot more challenging for an adversary to register a domain and immediately start spamming out emails than it used to be. So with living off trusted services in particular, defeating this is going to require deeper inspection of emails than we've done historically, because we're not going to be able to solely rely on metadata like the sender or just the URLs are in it. We're going to have to examine what's the messaging, right? We're also going to have to examine things like, does this bear signs of impersonation? A simple example of this would be something like, if my friendly from said Neil Hughes, but my email address was, some random string of characters at gmail.com.
Yeah.
That's a big red flag, right? That's unlikely your actual email address. Unless your cat signed you up for an email. So that level of deeper inspection is going to be one way that we're going to continue to combat this. And this is something that Fortra already does and is continuing to evolve on. But it's really also going to require a partnership with these providers, because as long as we keep giving fertile ground to adversaries where it's easy for them to abuse it, they're going to camp out there. We have to attack it from both sides of the equation to really stop this.
And I think that's a powerful moment to end on today. So much food for thought. And we've been talking about the very serious and daunting cat and mouse game between cybersecurity teams and cyber criminals. But before I let you go, I want to have a little bit of fun with you now. I always ask my guests to leave everyone listening with a book that means something to them for our Amazon wish list, or a song that we can add to our Spotify playlist. Guilty pleasures are allowed. You can leave either, but which is it that you would like to leave and why?
So I'll recommend a book. And we're going to pivot away from cybersecurity for a minute, right? I am somebody who, in addition to cybersecurity, really enjoys being able to help lead teams to, realize their full potential and lead organizations and really just help a bunch of people do really awesome things. And one of the books that I've read that has really inspired me on that is a book by a guy named Marshall Goldsmith called What Got You Here Won't Get You There. And it really helps people that are trying to make that journey from being an individual contributor and transitioning into leadership, understand that the things that make you strong when you're an analyst are still good even when you step into that leadership realm. But if you lean too far into them, they can actually get in your way, because leadership is a lot more about building consensus, getting people going in the same direction, having those strong relationships and getting that buy-in. It's a lot more about that than it is being right all the time. What Got You Here Won't Get You There really teaches that lesson, as well as a bunch of other powerful lessons in a really great way.
Awesome choice. I'll get that added straight to our Amazon wish list. And for the blog post that will accompany this website, I will include the link to the blog post that we mentioned today that's got a lot of that information around how you discovered that novel phishing campaign abusing USign. But for everyone listening, is there anywhere else you'd like to point them?
I am on LinkedIn. Feel free to connect with me there.
Perfect. Well, I want to add links to the website as well so people can find out more information about Fortra. And so many big talking points around this and around this campaign that was abusing USign and the e-signature platform there, so cyber criminals could bypass email security gateways and filtering tools with ease. So I do urge anyone listening to check that out. I will add links. But more than anything, Michael, just a big thank you for shining a light on this. And hopefully we've saved a few people from becoming a victim of this. But thanks for your time today.
Absolutely. It was a pleasure to speak with you, Neil.
I think our discussion with Michael today highlighted the ever-evolving nature of cybersecurity threats, particularly the concerning trend of attackers exploiting trusted services like USign. And as we've learned, defending against these sophisticated tactics requires a multi-layered approach, from enhancing user education to implementing more in-depth email inspections. And Fortra's findings underscore the importance of remaining vigilant and proactive in the face of so many of these threats. So if you would like to learn more about the insights and recommendations shared by Michael, I'll provide links over on my website, techblogwriter.co.uk. Go to podcasts. You should find this episode and I'll link to everything there. But before I go, what strategies would you prioritise to safeguarding your organisation against this next wave of cyber threats? Please email me, techblogwriter@outlook.com, Twitter, LinkedIn, Instagram, @NeilCHughes. Let me know your thoughts. Maybe we can all help each other remain that little bit safer online. But that's it for today. I will be back bright and early in your podcast feed with another guest bright and early tomorrow morning. But thanks for listening as always, and I will speak with you all again tomorrow. Bye for now.